Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about an HOA that thinks they own a common lake. I was balancing a paddleboard on the early mirror glass of the lake when a bullhorn's brassy bark shattered the hush. "You with the striped board, get off the water! Private lake!" The voice bounced across the cove, ragged with authority it hadn't earned. I squinted toward the eastern shore and spotted a trio of neon-vested sentries on the pier that jutted out from the new Lakeside Pines subdivision. The tallest one, a broad-shouldered guy whose sunglasses looked expensive enough to have their own mortgage, waved a laminated sign. I could just make out the letters HOA. I knew that stretch of shoreline. It fringed the same water my grandparents had handed down in their will. All riparian rights in common with adjoining owners. Nothing in the deed carve-out mentioned a homeowners association. Yet here was a self-appointed lake patrol telling me, the literal heir of half a mile of frontage, to vacate. The absurdity made me laugh. That laugh must have carried, because Mr. Sunglasses lowered the bullhorn and jabbed a finger. "Laugh all you want, buddy," he shouted, voice smaller without amplification. "This lake is for Lakeside Pines residents only. Unless your name's on our roster, you're trespassing." I paddled closer, using slow, deliberate strokes so they'd realize I wasn't intimidated. The calm August sun painted everything gold, like a tease that summer would last forever. "I live on the West Shore," I called out. "Been fishing and paddling here since I could walk." A second guard, a wiry woman with a clipboard, consulted a sheet of paper. "West Shore lots are outside our association," she yelled back. "Our covenants give exclusive recreational use to members in good standing. You can enjoy the view from your porch, but that's it." Part of me wanted to shrug and keep gliding. But another part, the part that remembered my granddad's stories of swimming clear across the lake at dawn, felt a familiar tug of stubbornness. So I asked the obvious question. "Since when?" "Since the subdivision was recorded and the covenants filed with the county recorder's office a year ago," Clipboard replied. "Maybe read the law before you break it." That got my blood up. Years earlier, I'd slogged through 2 semesters of property law before deciding the courtroom wasn't for me. But some lessons stick. One of them, you can't magically privatize a body of water designated as shared under state code by filing county paperwork. But bullies thrive on volume, not correctness. And these 3 looked ready to raise theirs. Sunglasses leveled the bullhorn again. "Last warning, leave or we'll call security." "You are security," I pointed out. He paused, recalibrating his threat. "Then we'll call the sheriff." I gave him a 2-finger salute of acknowledgement, spun the board, and paddled back toward the public boat ramp on my side. I'd come here for tranquility, but I'd leave with a mission. The ramp gravel crunched under my steps as I tied the board to the roof rack of my aging station wagon. My neighbor Harper, an unflappable middle school math teacher whose idea of rebellion was buying unsalted butter, waved from her kayak. I told her what happened. She whistled. "You gonna let it slide?" "Not even a little." "You planning fireworks?" "Better, paperwork." I drove straight to the county recorder's office. It occupied the 2nd floor of a 1970s brick cube that smelled like burnt coffee and microfilm. The clerk on duty was a retiree who knitted between customers. When I asked for Lakeside Pines subdivision plat and HOA covenants, she flipped through drawers, pulled 2 thick file folders, and set them on the counter. I skimmed the legal description. Sure enough, the covenants boasted sweeping language. "All riparian rights to Lake Fairview are hereby reserved exclusively to members in good standing." Nice try. The trouble was, Lake Fairview wasn't a private pond wholly encircled by their lots. It was a public trust water fed by a navigable tributary. State law said that once a waterway is navigable and used for commerce or recreation, adjoining owners hold it in common. The HOA could regulate its own docks, but not the water column or surface. They'd written fantasy into their rules. I copied the documents anyway, figuring a judge would appreciate exhibits. Then I stopped by the sheriff's headquarters. Deputy Branch, a lanky guy who spoke like every sentence was an apology, listened as I explained. I paddled past their pier, I finished. "They threatened me with trespassing because I'm not in their HOA," Branch sighed. "We've had a few calls from there, mostly noise complaints and dock disputes. No one's tested the lake claim yet. Guess I'll be the test case. If they phone it in, tell your dispatcher I'm asserting lawful right of navigation under Section 11 of the State Water Code. I'm also filing a complaint of criminal harassment." He nodded, made notes, and wished me luck. That night I dove into research. In law school, I'd learned that litigation is war fought with calendars, not swords. So I mapped my campaign in 3 phases. Phase 1, documentation. I spoke with longtime residents who remembered picnicking on the lake decades before the subdivision existed. Mrs. Clara, 91 and sharp as lemon zest, produced Polaroids of a 1974 Regatta. The boats flew pennants that read, "Community Days, all welcome." That photographic proof alone demolished the HOA's claim that Lakeside had exclusive historical use. Phase 2, regulatory reinforcement. I called the State Department of Environmental Conservation. The agent confirmed that Lake Fairview was on the official list of navigable waterways. He emailed me a letter stating so, bearing the department's seal. Phase 3, bring the HOA to heel. Litigation was an option, but courts moved slowly. Often, the mere filing of a suit prods opponents into settlement, especially when their position is indefensible. Still, I suspected the HOA board was too arrogant for an early capitulation, which meant I needed leverage beyond court costs. Leverage arrived 2 days later in the form of my cousin Tessa, a journalist turned podcaster whose true crime episodes routinely clocked 1 million listens. She dropped by for iced tea and updates on my life. I handed her the covenants and Clara's photos. "Smells like a story," she said, eyes bright. "Coercive HOA tries to fence off a public lake, threatens locals, demands membership dues. Mind if I record?" We spent an hour on the porch, cicadas buzzing backup vocals while I recounted the bullhorn incident. Tessa ended the interview with her trademark sign-off. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant. More soon." I had a feeling soon meant days, not weeks. Sure enough, the next morning, Lakeside Pines page exploded. Someone, wonder who, had posted a clip from Tessa's teaser. Comments ricocheted. Can they do that? Is the lake really public? I'm glad someone's standing up to those fee-hungry tyrants. By lunch, the HOA president, a man named Byron, whose profile picture featured a golf visor and a forced smile, issued a statement. The HOA is within its rights and will protect private property vigorously. False narratives will be met with legal action. I printed his statement and tucked it into my growing evidence binder. Thursday at dawn, I paddled out again, my camera strapped to my chest to capture whatever unfolded. Halfway across, the same neon vest trio emerged, this time joined by Byron himself. He wore boat shoes, a polo monogrammed with the HOA logo, and the sour look of someone who'd bitten a lemon and found a worm inside. Clipboard held up her phone. Recording me back, I assumed. Byron cupped his hands. "Turn around immediately, you're trespassing." "It's a navigable waterway," I replied, voice calm but carrying. "Your covenants can't override state law." He pulled out a walkie-talkie. "Security Team Alpha requesting sheriff assistance, code trespasser non-resident watercraft." I figured that was my cue. I dug my phone from the dry bag and dialed 911. The dispatcher recognized the situation. "Deputy Branch is en route. Do not engage." "Roger that," I said, though my heart raced. Branch arrived within 10 minutes, lights flashing but no siren, cutting a wake as he motored the patrol boat toward us. He asked for my ID, which I produced. Then he asked Byron for his. "What's the complaint?" Branch asked him. "Unauthorized individual on our private lake," Byron said, puffing up. Branch tapped his tablet. "Lake Fairview is classified as public under state code. Unless you can produce a superior claim, he's free to navigate." Byron's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He thrust a stapled sheaf, probably the covenants, at Branch, who glanced at it and shook his head. "Homeowners associations can regulate common areas within their deeded subdivision. They cannot seize public water. Stand down." Clipboard gasped as though she'd witnessed a magician reveal his trick. Branch turned to me. "You're clear, but I recommend staying 50 feet from their docks to avoid claims of interference." I nodded. He turned back to the cluster on the pier. "If your board continues to harass lawful users, we'll consider it disorderly conduct. Understood?" Byron muttered something unintelligible. Branch asked louder, "Understood?" "Fine," Byron snapped. The patrol boat hummed away. I paddled a lazy figure 8 in open water just to make my point before gliding home, adrenaline fizzing like shaken soda. If Byron's ego was bruised, it soon swelled into full inflammation. 2 certified letters arrived at my mailbox the next afternoon. The first, on HOA letterhead, demanded immediate cessation of defamatory statements and offered me the opportunity to avoid further conflict by joining Lakeside Pines HOA as a non-resident associate member for a modest annual fee of $900. The second, from a law firm whose name sounded like a vowel shortage, threatened a civil suit for trespass, nuisance, and emotional distress. I smiled because the more outrageous the threats, the weaker the case. Still, A lawsuit meant costs. I photocopied everything and sent copies to my insurance agent. Umbrella policies are a gift from the risk-averse gods. Then I penned my reply, a concise 3-page letter citing statutes, the county plat, the D.C. letter, and Supreme Court precedent on navigable waters. I ended with, "If your organization files suit, I will counterclaim for harassment, unlawful interference with my riparian rights, and attorney fees. Govern yourselves accordingly." I considered mailing it certified, but opted for personal delivery. Saturday morning, I walked through the subdivision gates like I owned the place, which, in a riparian sense, I partly did. Poster board signs near the model home advertised an afternoon block party. Residents only, membership cards required. Perfect. Their clubhouse, a faux stone chalet overlooking the water, buzzed with pre-party prep. Tables laden with sterno-warmed sliders, tubs of soda, and a cotton candy machine stood ready. I spotted Byron instructing 2 teens on balloon placement. He froze when he saw me. "Uninvited again," he said, voice tight. I brought paperwork. I handed him my envelope. "Consider this formal notice." He ripped it open, skimmed, then thrust it back. "You think you can scare us with statutes? Our lawyer says otherwise. Your lawyer's meter is running, mine will be too. Difference is I'm the defendant in a frivolous suit, and state law lets me recover costs." A crowd gathered. Clipboard whispered to a neighbor. Sunglasses hovered nearby, arms crossed. I could feel the tension ripple like heat off asphalt. Then a small voice piped up. "Mom, is he why we can't swim past the buoy?" A little girl, maybe 8, tugged her mother's sleeve. The mom looked torn, glancing between Byron and me. That was my opening. "Actually," I said, addressing the kid, "you're allowed to swim anywhere in the lake as long as you respect safety zones. The water belongs to everyone." Several parents exchanged looks. The narrative was shifting. Byron barked, "That's enough. Leave before I call security." "You said that last time." "And I'll keep saying it." I gave a small bow to the onlookers and walked out, adrenaline tethered by a thread. Back at my car, I exhaled so hard my cheeks fluttered. Confrontation is exhausting even when you're right. Sunday morning, my phone lit up with a dozen messages. Tessa's full podcast episode had dropped overnight, and apparently it hit like a small asteroid. She detailed the lake dispute, but also dug into the HOA's finances, specifically a line item labeled recreational enforcement. According to a whistleblower she'd interviewed, the board had levied a one-time security assessment on every homeowner to fund water patrol gear, bullhorn, and what appeared to be a contract with an off-duty private security firm. Worse, she'd filed open records requests revealing that the HOA president had a side business supplying those services, effectively paying himself with residents' dues. I nearly danced around my kitchen. Byron hadn't just overreached, he'd dipped his hand in the cookie jar. Residents exploded in fury. Screenshots forwarded to me showed calls for a special meeting, demands for audits, threats to recall the entire board. By noon, the HOA's social media page vanished. By dinner, 3 board members had resigned according to a leaked email. Monday brought the coup de grace. A courier delivered a thick envelope. Notice of dismissal without prejudice, the law firm dropping the threatened lawsuit, and a form letter that chirped, "The HOA values collaboration with our broader lake community. Translation, please don't sue us." I still could, but an idea sweeter than damages bloomed. A binding agreement, drafted by my own attorney, guaranteeing perpetual public access to the lake, signed by the new interim board under duress of public opinion. Add a clause requiring the HOA to post signs clarifying that the lake is shared, not private. When our council sent that draft, the board accepted within 48 hours. They even threw in an apology letter to all affected neighbors. That should have been the end, but stories rarely wrap in a neat bow. 2 weeks later, I took a twilight paddle, savoring the smell of pine resin and the neon stripes of sunset. Near the lakeside dock, I noticed fresh hardware, a cast iron sign bolted to a piling. It read in bold serif letters, "Public Waters. Enjoy responsibly." I coasted closer, heart thumping in quiet triumph. The sign was more than metal. It was evidence that sometimes the small-town Davids could still topple a well-funded Goliath, provided they came armed with facts, persistence, and a stubborn refusal to be bullied. A ripple nudged my board, and, balancing, I dipped my paddle in. The lake accepted me without question, the way it always had. It would do the same for anyone now, HOA membership or not. I let myself drift under the lingering pink sky, grateful for the water's hush, and for the knowledge that, this time at least, The law and a little righteous noise had kept a public treasure in public hands. The giddy rush of victory lasted about a week, 7 glorious days of kayaking at dawn, kids cannonballing off the public dock, and families from both shores picnicking together like the bad blood had never existed. Then, early on a fog-curdled September morning, I arrived at the county launch to find a galvanized steel chain stretched across the ramp posts. A padlock the size of a clementine dangled in the middle, and a laminated sign flapped in the breeze. Ramp closed, maintenance. The county road crew rarely laminated anything, and they certainly didn't punch the Lakeside Pines logo in the corner. I whipped out my phone and dialed the interim HOA secretary, a soft-spoken nurse named Fallon who'd been drafted after Byron's implosion. She answered on the second ring, already sounding tired. "You found the chain, didn't you?" "Just now." "I tried to stop them," she said, voice low. "Byron called an emergency safety committee last night. They voted to close the ramp until we can verify structural integrity. Total nonsense." "Who has the key?" "Only Byron." My pulse kicked. Fallon continued, "We're holding a special board meeting tonight at 7. Public invited. If you can make it, please do." By the time she hung up, Harper had rolled in with her minivan full of 6th graders armed with trash grabbers, her math club's community service project. She stared at the chain, eyes narrowing behind her Coke bottle lenses. "That man just can't let go, can he?" I popped the hatch on my wagon and dug out my bolt cutters. Harper whistled. "Bold move. Not touching it yet," I said, weighing the cutters in my hands like a warning. "But if that ramp isn't open by sunset, the county's going to hear about unauthorized obstruction of public property. And if they drag their feet, well," I tapped the cutters against my palm. The kids grinned as though I were a superhero brandishing a sword. That evening, the clubhouse parking lot overflowed onto nearby lawns. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in a horseshoe around a collapsible banquet table. Fallon sat at the center, gavel in front of her like a reluctant hammer. Byron occupied a seat off to one side, flanked by Clipboard, whose real name I'd learned was Petra, and Sunglasses, actually Hugo. They looked less like an enforcement squad tonight and more like a trio of sulking mall cops. Fallon opened the meeting with a tremor in her voice. "First agenda item, unauthorized closure of the public boat ramp. Byron, you invoked emergency powers under Section 9 of the bylaws. Please present your evidence of imminent hazard." Byron's face flushed crimson above his polo collar. He rifled through papers, finally producing a blurry cell phone photo of a hairline crack in the concrete ramp. "Trip hazard," he announced. "We're liable if someone breaks an ankle." A snort escaped me, but I kept it behind clenched teeth. That hairline crack had existed since the Carter administration. Harper's math club kids had painted it neon orange last year as part of a safety sprucing project. Fallon pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Did the county engineer declare the ramp unsafe?" Byron avoided her gaze. "Awaiting consultation." "So you preemptively chained it off," Fallon said flatly. "Despite the access agreement our attorney just signed?" He muttered something about prudence. The audience, homeowners, lakeside locals, anglers, teenagers in flip-flops, shifted as a collective wave of annoyance rolled through the room. I raised my hand. Fallon nodded. "For the record," I said, projecting my voice, "the ramp belongs to the county. Tampering with it violates State Transportation Code, Section 48, subsection B. The maximum penalty is a fine and, ironically, community service at public recreation facilities." A ripple of chuckles spread. I wasn't trying to grandstand, well, maybe a little, but Byron needed public shaming. Hugo leaned forward. "County never enforced that code before." "True," I replied, "but you taught me something, Hugo. Bullhorn volume matters. Sheriff's deputies respond to whoever yells loudest. I can yell pretty loud." Fallon cleared her throat. "All those in favor of removing the chain immediately and issuing a written apology to the county?" Nearly every hand shot up, including Petra's. Only Byron and Hugo abstained. Fallon's gavel came down like a coffin lid. "Motion passes." Byron slammed his folder shut. "You're making a mistake. When someone gets hurt, don't come crying to me." "Trust me," Harper called from the back. "Nobody's come crying to you yet." The chain came off before dawn, courtesy of the sheriff's bolt cutters. Byron, thwarted but not deflated, pivoted to subtler tactics. Over the next 2 weeks, he filed noise complaints whenever kids splashed near his dock. He reported my paddleboard lights as unregistered maritime beacons. He even tried to cite Harper's students for illegal wildlife feeding when they tossed stale bread to the ducks. Deputy Branch, whose patience had the elasticity of a rubber band left in the sun, finally left Byron a voicemail so stern it leaked into department lore. According to Branch, the message ended with, "Call again without evidence and I'll cite you for wasting public resources." Byron went dark for 3 days, which everyone agreed was more unnerving than the harassment itself. During that lull, Tessa released a follow-up episode. This one focused on how small communities weaponize obscure rules. She interviewed a constitutional law professor who compared aggressive HOAs to petty tyrants. The episode shot to the top of the podcast charts under the title Neighborhood Napoleons. Byron's name trended regionally for 48 humiliating hours. That alone might have been punishment enough, but the universe had bigger plans. One crisp Saturday in early October, a flotilla assembled at dawn for the resurrected Community Days Regatta, a tradition dormant since the 90s. Sailboats unfurled candy-striped sails. Kayaks adopted absurd mascots, a papier-mâché flamingo, a cardboard Viking dragon head. Harper's Math Club had converted a pontoon into a floating decimal display that lit up pi to 50 digits. They named it the Piecemeal. Mrs. Clara, propped on pillows, judged forms from the lakeshore under a crimson parasol. I captained my paddleboard, now sporting a banner that read, "Public waters are happy waters." Fallon led the parade in a borrowed Park Service dinghy. Even Deputy Branch joined, his patrol boat festooned with streamers of caution tape turned festive. We'd just rounded the first buoy when a sleek base boat cut across the flotilla, engine roaring like a chainsaw. Waves slapped hulls. Kayaks wobbled. At the helm was Byron, jaw clenched, Hugo beside him. Petra stood on the bow brandishing a handheld loudspeaker. "Unscheduled regatta. Disperse immediately." Her voice cracked with something that sounded less like authority and more like desperation. Branch gunned his patrol boat to intercept. Over the PA he commanded, "Cut your engine. Idle speed only within 50 feet of other vessels." Byron ignored him, throttling harder, his prop carving angry froth. He swerved toward Harper's pontoon. Kids screamed, scrambling for balance. Time dilated. I dug my paddle deep and sprinted across the water, angling between Byron and the pontoon. My board slapped Byron's wake and nearly bucked me into the drink, but I stayed upright long enough to signal Branch, circling my arm overhead. Branch hit the siren. The electronic whoop ricocheted across the lake as if the hills themselves were hollering. Byron finally eased off the throttle, but momentum carried him into a hollow aluminum canoe whose occupants were too astonished to scream. The collision sounded like a cymbal crash. The canoe spun, but blessedly, no one capsized. Within seconds, Branch was alongside, blue strobes reflecting on the water. "Cut the engine, sir. Step away from the controls." Byron tried to protest, but Branch wasn't listening. He cuffed Byron's wrists with zip ties, read rights in measured tones, and guided him onto the patrol boat. Hugo and Petra sputtered excuses that died in their throats when they saw the cell phone cameras pointed their way. The regatta paused, then cautiously resumed as Branch motored off with his detainee, an impromptu parade marshal of justice. Kids cheered, horns tooted, and somewhere a vuvuzela blared a triumphant fart. I paddled past the canoe occupants, who gave a thumbs up. My knees shook from adrenaline, but my grin threatened to split my face. That night, the local news station looped Branch's body cam footage. The headline, "HOA President Arrested After Regatta Ramming." Comments flooded social media, 98% gleeful. Someone mashed up the siren audio with the Jaws theme. It went viral by breakfast. Byron spent 48 hours in county lockup before posting bail. The district attorney charged him with reckless endangerment, aggravated boating under the influence, blood tests showed enough whiskey to pickle a goat, and criminal mischief. But the real hammer fell when the interim board, invoking a rarely used clause, voted to expel Byron from the association entirely. Losing HOA membership meant he forfeited access to the subdivision pier and amenities, including the coveted lakeside boat slip he'd used as a power perch. Homeless on his own shoreline, Byron moored his bass boat at a public marina 5 miles away, where rumor had it he became the guy nobody invited to potlucks. Petra resigned 2 days later, citing personal focus reset. Hugo tried to stay on as security liaison until residents discovered he'd padded invoices for bullhorn batteries, $300 worth in a single quarter. He left in disgrace, mumbling about starting a consultancy. The new board, headed by Fallon, bless her steadfast soul, voted to abolish the recreational enforcement budget line altogether. They reallocated the funds to a scholarship for local teens pursuing environmental science. Harper's math club kids were first in line. I wish I could say peace descended permanently, but cleaning up after a neighborhood Napoleon leaves a mess. The county launched a formal audit of the HOA's finances. Tessa, sniffing a bigger story, obtained the preliminary report through a Freedom of Information request. Turns out Byron had reimbursed himself for lake maintenance consulting to the tune of $18,000 over 3 years. The consultant, a Shell LLC registered to a post office box in a strip mall where his mother managed a dry cleaners. When the state attorney general got wind, they opened an investigation into potential wire fraud and tax evasion. Byron's attorney, an overcaffeinated man with triple-digit success fees, negotiated a plea deal that required Byron to repay the HOA, serve 6 months house arrest, and log 200 community service hours teaching boat safety classes for the Parks Department. The irony of him preaching safety on the same waters he'd tried to commandeer was lost on no one. His first class drew a record crowd, most of them there for schadenfreude. Mrs. Clara allegedly brought popcorn. Meanwhile, the Regatta blossomed into an annual Lake Fairview festival, craft booths, live music, a barbecue contest judged by the county fire chief. Kids painted canoe bottoms with glow-in-the-dark paint for a twilight parade. The scholarship fund grew faster than algae on a stagnant canal. I took on a quieter role, mentoring high schoolers who wanted to map shoreline erosion with drones. Harper and I supervised weekend cleanups, where we found fewer beer cans and more dragonfly larvae, a sign the ecosystem was bouncing back. Fallon persuaded the county to install interpretive signs about riparian rights and invasive species control. One of the signs featured a QR code that linked to Tessa's podcast episode. She titled it, "How to Shrink a Napoleon, Civic Engagement for the Rest of Us." Winter arrived, the lake crusted with glassy ice, and life contracted to wood smoke, flannel, and hockey on cleared rinks. Byron, ankle monitor visible above his snow boots, shoveled the community center sidewalk every morning like clockwork. He never spoke to me directly, but once I caught him staring across the frozen expanse toward my side of the shore. His expression wasn't anger so much as bewilderment, like a man who'd built a throne out of sand and couldn't fathom why the tide ignored him. Spring thaw brought hope and mud. One thawing afternoon, Fallon called to report that Byron had completed his service hours without incident. His restitution checks, however, bounced twice. The board filed for wage garnishment. Byron sold the base boat to cover the shortfall, its gleaming hull trailered away by a grinning buyer who whistled, "Anchors away." Byron watched from his porch stairs, shoulders sagging. As the final restitution payment cleared, the board voted to restore social privileges if Byron wrote a public apology. He declined. Nobody was surprised. He listed his house within a week, staging photos to crop out the lake entirely. It languished on the market until a young couple with twin toddlers offered $50,000 below asking. He took it and vanished north, rumored to be flipping condos in a city where nobody cared about lakes or HOAs. The day the sold sign sprouted in Byron's yard, Harper invited half the county for a lakeshore potluck. Fallon rented a portable projector, and at twilight we screened a montage of lake memories. Vintage Super 8 clips of the 1974 Regatta, photos of kids learning to paddleboard, time-lapse drone footage of autumn leaves bleeding color into the water. The final frame read, "Shared places make stronger neighbors." As applause faded into cricket song, Mrs. Clara tottered to the mic with the steadiness of a seasoned drill sergeant. "If my late husband were here," she said, eyes misting behind giant bifocals, "he'd remind us that water keeps no score. It only reflects. Tonight it reflects community. And that's the prettiest thing I've seen in 91 years. Harper cued fireworks, low-noise, pet-friendly ones. They blossomed like dandelions of light, their reflections rippling across the lake, doubling the spectacle. Standing at the shoreline, I felt the gentle push of waves against my boots, a reassuring nudge from the lake itself. Someone tapped my shoulder. It was Deputy Branch holding 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. He handed me one. "Looks like you got your lake back," he said. "Not just mine," I corrected. "Everyone's." He raised his mug. "To public waters." We drank, and for a moment the world was hushed except for lapping waves and distant laughter. The chaos, the lawsuits, the podcasts, the patrol boats, it all distilled into this simple triumph. A community choosing inclusion over control. I walked down the pier past the public waters sign that still gleamed from its fresh coat of anti-rust paint. The moon cast a silver road across the surface. I kicked off my shoes, let the lake's chill seep into my toes, and breathed in the cool, mineral smell that always reminded me of my grandfather's summer stories. Friends, thank you. See you soon.